Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting the session at 12:02. We're just for more people to join. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Well, good afternoon at this point. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're having an information session on our upcoming webinar. It's about CPCSC readiness and what executives must know before the 2025 to 2027 rollout. On our agenda today, we're going to talk about why CPCSC is a business risk and not an IT issue. We're also going to talk about requirements and contract eligibility, what it is, CPCSC, what it is, and why it matters. Key triggers starting in 2025, scope mistakes and hidden costs, what leaders must oversee, early compliance and why it's a competitive advantage, and how our workshop will help to provide clarity and roadmap. So before we begin, We'd like to say that this is for educational purposes. We do not represent the government of Canada. It's not official guidance for the government of Canada. If you're looking for up-to-date information, please visit the official CPCSC site. Our session today is being recorded. That's just for your information. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And then at the end, we'll also have a question and answer session. Today, our two speakers are Murat and Shashant. They're both very knowledgeable in the CPCSC area, and they're also here to answer any questions you may have at the end of the session. So I'm going to pass this over to Shashant now, and he will begin our info session for today.
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. My name is Sushant, and I will be setting up a stage for this webinar. This webinar is particularly focusing on helping defense industrial-based leaders to understand what responsibility fall under their net. So let us try to understand who this webinar and why this matters, who this webinar is for and why this matters. Cybersecurity has been on the IT issue, but now it is becoming a business issue and business risk. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, we all know that it is getting complicated or extremely hard to achieve, because the cybersecurity has been issue on the side of IT, but now it is not only about tools, it is becoming compliance expectations from the defense industrial base. So we see a lot of guidance on the side of CPCSC on the technology side, but which all talks about controls, encryptions, and log sources. But when it comes to executive needs to lead these programs, and that's where we see the gap. This information session is particularly focusing on helping leaders carry the business risk, particularly CEOs, CCO, CIO, CTOs, and executives who are responsible for contracts, revenue, and organizational readiness. So when it comes to contract, your reputation is at the stake, your business is at risk. And most of the times, it is not only IT issue, it becomes an organizational issue. So when it comes to us, what we have observed while working with multiple organizations, many organizations treat this as a IT risk or IT issue. And CPCSC actually requires organizational leaders support. So in this case, what we want to discuss is not about what NIST 800-171 is about, or what this ITSP 10.171 is about, how many controls are there, because we have covered these controls and list of requirements in previous webinars. Now we want to understand or help you understand what executive actions are required at the moment, and how can you efficiently leverage this upcoming 12 to 18 months window in order to prepare your organizations to bid for the contract. So the goal today is to understand strategic steps, actionable items, how to set governance scope, how to set some investment aside for this kind of CPCSC or cybersecurity programs, and what kind of accountability framework you need to utilize while you are leading this program with confidence. So can we go to next slide, please, Deborah? Now let us talk about reality. The compliance landscape, cybersecurity compliance landscape, particularly for defense suppliers in Canada, has changed. CPCSC, which is also known as Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification, has moved from proposal or in consideration phase to active phase now. So we are already talking in the first phase of the program that started in Jan 2025. And this is not only related to future requirements, this might start appearing in the contract very soon. So the CPCSC program is in 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, ranging from will be in 2025, 2026 will be in second phase, and 2027 will be in the third phase of the program. When it comes to phases, every contract you bid, that might come up with some requirement related to cybersecurity preparedness or readiness. So what we are looking at is how our future contracts or current contracts will be written, awarded, and renewed. Now, let us talk about business risk and where it lies in the CPCSC. Many organizations who are unprepared at this moment, their contracts might get at risk based on the contractors or contracting officers thought process. If they put any CPCSC requirement in the contract, the eligibility becomes critical. Even if you have technically you might be at ISO 27001 compliant state or any other compliant state, but those compliance does not equate with CPCSC compliance. Many a times this programs come with unique requirements. In this case, we will be looking at level 1, 2, and 3 of compliance, and each compliance requirement has different level, count of controls required to implement in the organization. So how can we utilize this state as a competitive advantage? There might be two types of defense contractors in the defense industrial base. One who are looking at the CPCSC as a real world issue and which might be a reality for their contracts eligibility in near future. Those people will be early adopters for this type of programs, and they will be able to bid with confidence, and they can also respond to any security questionnaires from the organizations with confidence. They will face fewer conditions when they are bidding for any contracts. Whereas on other hand, people who are waiting to see this getting formalized and appearing in contract, they will be facing challenges of compressed timelines to comply with this type of requirements. Or also there might be some supply demand issues on the consulting side or tooling cost. Also, it puts contracts at the risk. So I want you to think of yourself as a leader who is owner of CPCSC program, and the important thing which I want you to take home is CPCSC is not the IT project. It is a strategic positioning and the decision that organizational leaders take for over next 2 to 3 years, which positions organizations in the compliant state. Moving on to next slide. So let us look at CPCSC from layman terms. What CPCSC is? It is a Canadian government cybersecurity certification requirement or program for defense and security suppliers. The purpose for this program is very simple. The organizations which are currently receiving specified information, that is what we call for the control information over here, which is sensitive, unclassified, but important to protect, which is held in contractor systems, should be protected in consistent and enforceable standard. When I say enforceable, it is like the way government is protecting these organizations. It is expected that suppliers will also show due care and due diligence toward the same data at the same level of due care. When it comes to structure of the program, we have gone through levels earlier, but here I would like to focus on levels, not from the controls perspective. It is from the perspective of understanding what the scope look like. When it comes to level 1, it is very foundational. It covers basic cyber hygiene. There are around 13 controls which we need to implement in the program. When it comes to level 2, it gets complicated. There are around 110 controls. It is a broader way of looking at security from physical security perspective. The processes which you follow on the HR side, the processes which you follow on onboarding, offboarding side, and also sometimes it is like not sometimes, but it is always including your vendors in the scope. Level 3 is quite extensive. It is like an expert level. Here, assessments and audits are not being done by third parties. The auditors will be government itself, and they will be going through understanding your infrastructure, looking at the threats and environment, and making sure that your infrastructure is complying with the standard that they want us. So there is similar program like CPCSC happening on the US side, and what the program is called as CMMC. And this is out of the observations what we saw over there. Many organizations were waiting for CMMC to become a formal requirement. And now that the formal requirement, like the requirement has become formal on 10th of November 2025, we are seeing a lot of rush happening to comply with the CMMC, and then the span of compliance or the span given for organization to comply with this requirement has also got reduced to 8 to 9 months now, because they need to also comply with this before 10th of November 2026. So in this case, let us talk about why now again, and just emphasize on critical steps what we will be taking over here. Next slide, please. Why now? So fall 2025, level 1 contracts, level 1 became a mandatory requirement for all contractors to comply with. The key message which I want to take out here is the timeline has already started. We are already in the phase 1. So level 1 is a requirement, or level 1 is level 1 compliance is mandatorily required for all defense contractors, and which includes around 13 controls, as I mentioned earlier. When it comes to level 2 and level 3, these levels are required for contractors with high sensitivity or high sensitive work. The prime contractors will dictate the requirements for subcontractors. And here, this organizations who are touching control designs, mission critical data, or they are delivering key services, those are eventually in the scope for level 2 and level 3. So what we need to do here now, we have to understand the program. We have to understand levels of activities that will change in your organization. So when it comes to cybersecurity program, we often see there are 3 levels: people, processes, and technology. How this program is going to implement, how we work with people, what type of staffing we do inside our organization, what type of technological requirements will be implemented on our organization, what changes we will see in the technological state. And then we move on to the processes, where we will be able to see how our existing processes might change on the side of HR, and not only HR, but also accounts, and how we manage our infrastructure, the the processes where we follow some kind of data flows, and how we are dealing with data transitions in our infrastructure. Next slide, please. After working with multiple organizations, what we have seen is there are major 3 blind spots these executive leaders are leaving behind. The blind spot 1 is misunderstanding the scope. CPCSC does not apply only to one system or one application or one contract. There might be a case that each contract requires you to comply and provide the attestation for different levels of compliance. So certification boundary also includes broader operating environment. It includes processes, it includes vendors, it includes technologies which you use, cloud platforms which you use. If we go and only comply a smaller area of our organization, let's say testing or development, or maybe it can be a production environment, then we are unnecessarily making our cybersecurity program complicated. When it comes to smaller scope, the cost which we are going to incur on this program might get repetitive. The second issue, what we are typically seeing here in the organizations is, as this is a technical program or a program led by technical requirements, we often misunderstand it as an IT issue. So here I'm here to tell, like, IT will handle it only for the technology related concerns, but organizational leaders will have to be accountable for this program. They will have to take up a responsibility of leading this program, making sure that the organizations are complying with required state of required state by given timelines. First and foremost is understanding what type of governance structure we need to implement in our organization. How can we prioritize our contracts and our compliancy level based on based on the bids which we are foreseeing in upcoming years or existing bids. In a nutshell, this is an executive responsibility. Decisions has to come up top down. And third blind spot, what we typically see is waiting to see CPCSC become reality on contract clauses. So when we wait to see CPCSC contract clause appear in our contract, the assessment window gets reduced drastically. Internal teams will have maximum pressure to comply with in a short span. Also, when it comes to these blind spots, we want executives to understand how we can get rid of these blind spots and scope our organization, prepare our readiness according to our requirements for the contract levels. According to our contracts requirement, how can we prepare our team to comply with this as soon as possible? Next slide, please. I'd like to share some insights on why organizations miscalculate the scope. When it comes to CPCSC, as I mentioned earlier, it looks like a set of controls that need to implement. But the decisions is based on contracts, environments, and vendors you work with. When it comes to contracts, every contract will be stating the level of requirement, level of compliancy, and then if we treat CPCSC as one generic requirement, we might over-invest by including whole organizations in the scope. Every environment, such as production, development, test, or cloud environment, may fall in the scope based on the sensitive data flowing in that environment. If we have a development environment where specified information or control information, as we earlier used to call it, is flowing or is getting printed, that environment also gets under the scope. Critically, vendors will extend the risk here. When it comes to working with vendors, if you are dealing with, let's say, cloud provider or managed service provider, subcontractors with whom you are sharing critical data or technical data, they will also be included in the scope. And based on your level of compliance, they will have a flow down requirement, which requires them to comply with the same level of CPCSC based on your compliance level. With this, I will hand it over to Murad to go over what executives can do in this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Sushant. So you're going to look at what executives actually need to oversee, right? So there's like three key areas. The first one is governance and accountability, right? So you want to make sure that there's clear compliance ownership, right? Because in any organization, like ownership is a challenge, right? Like especially when you have joint things happening, as well as reporting lines, right? One key thing that Sushant sort of touched upon is timelines, right? So the initial rollout of CPCSC, like they have done for CMMC, it's not going to be enforced for you to be eligible for the contract, but it's going to be a requirement for contract award, right? So what that means is you may be successful in a procurement, but if you don't get your proper certification levels, contract award is not going to happen, which means it's revenue lost, right? Like if you wait for a year to get your certification done, then you don't have a revenue for that contract for a year, right? So which is sort of you got to look at it from a financial and risk visibility, right? And then keep in mind, like there's a cost to implement this program, but you also have to balance it with, what's my, business cost of not running the contract, right? So if the contract gives you $1 million every month and your deployment cost for a program is 75K, that's an easy one. That's why, Sushant sort of mentioned that it's not an IT problem. It's becoming it's becoming a business issue, right? Because money definitely talks, right? The other thing that you want to look at from an executive perspective is timing, right? Like you got to focus on your first 90 days. You got to focus on what your scope is. And then you got to look at, okay, what am I doing? My 6-month, 12-month typical deployment, right? The other key thing that as an executive, you got to be cognizant of that. Let's say you're going for a level 2. You got to get certified by a third party every 3 years, but there's self reporting every year, right? So it's not just third party, you get a sticker that's good for 3 years. You also got to do it every year, and then you got to follow up. Next slide, please, Deborah. So what are the executive decisions that make or break the compliance, right? So depending on how big you are, like if you're a small shop, that's an easy call to make, right? But if you're looking at, like, let's say your General Dynamics, right? You want to look at which programs you're going to be prioritizing, right? Which ones are going to be key one. The other issue that we see in both in CPCSC and CMMC is scope assignment, right? Like you do have two options when you actually do the scoping. The first one is you can say, I'm going to do the whole organization, right? It will take longer, right? But if you're done, you're done. The other thing that you can do is you can say, I'm just going to do this one small enclave, right? Which is a common approach. But that the challenge is if you're utilizing anything other than the enclave on the contract, then you got to go through certification. So that's why it's not really a technology decision. It's more of a business decision, right? You also need to make sure that there's proper resource allocation, right? Even if you hire consultants like ourselves, you still need some teams or people internally that actually help with deployment and then getting the proper information, right? So that one is going to be really critical. The other one is, which IT investments that we're doing, right? Now, CMMC from a program perspective is more mature. Like they're about 18 months ahead of Canadian program, right? And then the way they structure in CMMC is you have 1, 3, and 5-point controls. If you cannot meet 3-point or 5-point control in CMMC, you're out, right? Now, CPCSC hasn't declared how that's going to be handled, right? They may follow a similar thing or they may not. We don't know that yet. But if that's the case, you want to look at, okay, if I'm using a CMMC example, if I'm missing, 3-point or 5-point requirements, I'm not going to be able to get certified, right? It's 1 or 0. So then you have to focus on, okay, which ones I'm going to focus on, right? Like MFA is a great example, right? That you actually need to make sure that there's MFA for admins for sure, but also end users, right? The other key thing that people miss is your third-party governance, right? Like who are you actually utilizing? Who do you depend on? Keep in mind, there's a flow through, right? So if you're processing anything PB, right, and then you have a couple of vendors that are doing PA, protected A, they also need to be assessed as part of CPCSC, right? Next slide, please. Actually, there's one question from Imran. It's a good question. So Imran is asking, like, there's a lot of subject matter experts that provide resources, right? So this is not going to impact resources per se, right? This is mainly for companies that are processing what's now called specified information, right? So if your company is, and it mainly applies, I will say manufacturing is a big thing, right? If you're producing a widget of some sort, right, then this will actually come into play, right? That's going to include, PA, PB, PC, or control goods, right? But it's mainly going to be for people that are sort of doing some sort of, either IP or manufacturing something, right? That's why it's the Canadian Defense Industrial Base, right? In this case. I'm hoping I answered your question, Imran. We can look at it at the end and then go through it. So, the key question is, why do I comply now, right? So Sushant sort of mentioned it. It's going to be a timing issue, right? Because there's going to be limited people of third-party assessors, and it's going to take a while to assess, right? So in US, like what we are seeing right now is the wait time is about 18 months, right? So imagine that you just won a contract with DND, and DND says you must meet level 2 CPCSC requirements, right? Well, now you got to go find a third-party assessor, right? Get the contract with them, get the assessment done, get your certification. So whatever that timeline is, then you're not going to be able to get the contract award, right? So that's why the certification is it's going to give you a market advantage, right? So you can actually target to get contract awards early. You can also make it like a differentiating factor. You can say, look, we have all the certifications, right? Now, in order to level the playing field, Government of Canada said it's not going to be a requirement to compete for the work, but it's going to be a requirement for a contract award. Now, based on discussions with the executives on the program, this is going to change, I will say, within 3 years, right? That they will actually start making it more requirement to say, okay, you need to qualify this, but we're not at this point yet, right? The other thing that people also look at is like you have to look at what your posture is, right? Like it actually signals that, hey, if I have already get certification, think of it as, keep in mind, this is third party, right? Like if we're doing level 2, it's a third party certification, similar to like, you get an ISO 27001 or, SOC 2 assessment, right? And then the other key thing is you will stand out. Like if you already have a certification, CPCSC certification, with anything else, any of the certification that's relevant in this realm, it's going to make you stand out. So you can say, hey, like I have the certification level. We do have proper cybersecurity covered in here, right? Next slide, please, Deborah. So like what we're actually promoting is we actually do, are you going to be covering this one, Sushant, or do you want me to cover this one?
So I think this is 14. You can cover this.
Sure. So like what we actually have is we have developed an executive only CPCS leadership workshop that covers some of the topics that we just talked about, right? So the whole purpose of this training session is, sort of explain things in plain language, right? So like no technical jargon, and then also properly explain what you need to do, because this is something new, right? And executives need to know, okay, what do I do, right? Like I have to meet this requirement. What do I do? Where do I go? Our current program is about 4 hours. Sushant is going to get into details on the next slide. But from what you can expect from a strategic manager perspective is, understand what the requirements are. How does it work, right? What's the program? What are the timelines? And then what's your contract risk, right? As I mentioned, like you're not going to get a contract award if you don't have the proper certification level, right? The other thing that we're promoting is clear visibility, right? So we're looking at giving the executives enough information so they can understand what this is and how they can actually translate it into their own organization to actually get that certification level done, right? And then we also want to give you guys for someone who actually attend the session is, what are the actionable direction you can take, right? Like here's the things that you can do within 90 days. Here's your things that you can do within 6 months, right? Because the executive in the organization, you're the one that actually know, but you have to look at how you're handling it. There's a couple of questions. I'm going to try to see if I can answer those. So compliance investments between different security standards, so 33, 2701, 853. So if you look at, SB 171 it's basically 853, which is ITSG 33 is the Canadian version, right? So there's definitely lots of overlap. The only difference is the SB 171 that CMMC uses revision 2. The Canadian version uses revision 3, right? And there's about a 3-year technological difference between those. So it's a big change, but it's still NIST 800, 53. revision 5, it still applies. So there's a lot of stuff you can reuse. Not necessarily with ISO, but there's definitely things that we can reuse from a NIST perspective, because that's the same source, right? Like if you look at, the source document, this is SP 171 and SP 172, right? So there's definitely things that you can actually use. Yeah, so it's sorry, it's going to be aligning into NIST publications, right? SB 171 and 172. And if we look at ITS 333, which is now renamed, it's based on 853, right? So that's where actually the connection is, right? I think that's all the questions I have. So Sean, I think you have the next slide, right?
Yes. So after going through multiple conversations with executives, we tried understanding how can we create a product or a workshop which is based on awareness as well as helping them to get ready with the confidence. So what we have done is we have created a workshop which is 4 hours long. It is divided into 4 sessions, 1 hour each. And what outcomes do we get out of this workshop? So based on this workshop, the first and foremost is what oversight requirements that executives need to have when it comes to programs such as CPCSC. For a time being, we will be considering this as a cybersecurity program, and we will also understand like how a cybersecurity program plays a vital role in business environment and business growth. That will be the critical outcome. Then we will also have a clear understanding of how the cybersecurity team or compliance team might look like. We will have understanding of how the RACI metrics look like, who is accountable, who is responsible, who should be consulted, who should be informed in this type of program specific goals. Then how can we align our legal, procurement, HR operations, IT operations to one governance model? These are the outcomes which we will see on the establishing accountability governance side. The second decision, and which is quite critical and moves needle many times, is what's the budget requirement? What resources we need to add for this program? How do we come to conclusion that this is the level which we need to comply with by what time? Which contracts are critically important? Which contracts can wait for the further guidance? That's where we will be coming to conclusion of level of compliance requirement, understanding how can we go for the scoping, understand what infrastructure will fall under the CPCSC net, what type of tools and technology investment is required. So based on this, the leaders will be able to take decisions related to investment with confidence. So those are the areas where we will be focusing. And it is not only about those outcome in form of knowledge. We will be also enabling the attendees with some of the toolkits. The toolkits are in form of documents where you can input some of your information related to your organization. So that's what we call templates, and those templates will give you clear indication of where you stand on the curve, which are the top 5 areas of which are the top 5 areas where where your investment is critically important at the moment. Some type of governance checklist, which will help you understand how you can remediate the gaps, how you can conduct the gap assessments with confidence, how can you establish the roadmap for the CPCSC program. So it is more around practical decision making, prioritization, and strategical workshop. Post this workshop, we are also offering a bonus advisory support of up to 30 to 60 minutes, one-on-one advisory, understanding your scope and your particular challenges of the organization, which helps us understand your situation better and give you guidance according to your scope and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning earlier, who should attend this workshop? CEOs, COOs, CIOs, CTOs, people who are in leadership role, who are responsible for making decisions related to contract, who are responsible for balance sheet, P&L leaders, who are responsible for overall business risk. Apart from that, we can also have some board members be part of this conversation, where board members need to be informed about some of the critical decisions or steps that we will be taking. Regarding the logistics of this workshop will be conducted on 14th of Jan. It is, as I was mentioning about this workshop earlier, this is 4-hour workshop. It will be completely held online. Post this workshop or webinar, you will be receiving email from us, which will include the link, which will have link to register for this workshop. Based on your current state and potential required level of compliance, feel free to register and enroll for this workshop. Next slide, please. Okay, so here I will hand over to Deborah.
That brings us to the end of our session today. We're going to move over to questions and answers. You should be able to unmute your mics now and also turn on your cameras if you wish. If you have a question, please raise your hand up and we will go by order of first come, first serve. These are the resources we have. So the ITSP 10-171, which is the Canadian adaptation of the 800-171. So now we'll move on to questions. Right now I see we have Hello.
Hey, yes, Deborah, this is me.
Hi, you
Okay.
can say your question. Sorry.
All right. Hey, thanks, Shushan, and Murad for the presentation. So I have a just question. So if I want to get the certification done, for actually for myself and as an individual contractor, so do I have to can I skip the level 1 and go to level 2 directly, or I have to go level 1 first and then level 2?
Yeah, so let me take that one. So like this is CPCSC is not for individuals, right? So it's for companies, right? Hello. So
business, okay.
And keep in mind the program like CMMC is more organized, right? Like there's different certifications. It's a fully fledged program in the US. We're not there yet in Canada, so we still don't know how the structure is going to work. Like in the US, you have to be a CCP like myself and Sushant is. And then you also need to be a CCCA, like CMMC certified assessor, CMMC certified practitioner, right? So those level of details is not ready in CPCSC program.
Okay.
It will be ready, like it will come out, but it's not available at the moment, right? But CPCSC is not for individuals, it's for actual organizations or companies dealing with what we call specified information. It used to be called controlled information, but they didn't want to confuse it with Treasury Board labeling of, controlled info, but it's not for individuals. I expect that there's going to be some sort of certification, but those details are not available at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Maura.
No problem. Margolin, you have a question.
Yeah, Ariane, actually.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful, especially, dealing with the differences between Canada and the US. So my question is kind of twofold. One thing that I'm running into, I have experience with the CMMC. So, having been through that, but doing it for Canada, because there are there's a lot of overlap, and I think you touched on it briefly during the presentation about external service providers and the fact that they need to be at the same level as the organization seeking certification. So my question is there, does the standards, the Canadian standards, do they have, or is there kind of a list of external service providers that are a bit like Summit 7 in the US where they've gotten a head start? Because I've talked to some of the primes and it doesn't seem like that's true. So that this may be, a problematic, I understand it's at the beginning, but, problematic going forward. And then the second aspect is that 171 addresses, protecting controlled information. So when we're talking about something like Microsoft, are we looking for, protected A, protected B, protected C, depending on the need, and then kind of branching out very, very similar to the American version. And that's how I would approach the problem if I were doing, say, an enclave or a hybrid. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So like, let me take a crack at it, and then jump in, right? So I just want to correct one statement, right? So let's say as an organization, you must have level 2, right? It doesn't automatically means that your third party or your service provider has to be level 2. It all depends what type of information they're processing, right? So it's quite common that you may need to have level 2, but your vendors might need a level 1, right? Depends on what level of information they're processing, right? And then specified information definition, based on CSC is, right, PA, PB, PC data, and it sometimes includes control goods too, right? Like the big benefit in the US CMMC program is they have a government cloud, right? So in Canada, we don't have that. It's all public cloud. So in the States, what they can do is, if you're on the Gov Cloud, you can get FedRAMP certification. That covers like 70% of your controls, right? In Canada, we don't have it, so it's public cloud. Therefore, there's no government cloud. Therefore, you cannot really inherit or do anything with it. That's going to be a challenge, right? Like we'll cross that bridge. We're not there yet, but that's going to be tougher compared to the CMMC program. I'm not sure if I answer your questions, Ari.
Partly, yes. Thank you.
Sushant, anything you want to add?
Yeah, when it comes to crosswalking both frameworks, earlier we were hoping to see some kind of reciprocal approach where CMMC is equal to CPCSC, but now that we are changing definitions, changing revisions that we are using from NIST 800-171, things will be little bit complicated. We might have to parallelly run two programs which are focusing on different types of terminology and compliance requirements. When it comes to ESP clouds providers, things will be different compared to, like as Murat was mentioning, FedRAMP is the standard that we can inherit in case of CMMC, and that gets us up to 60 to 70% compliant with CMMC requirements. But as this is not the case, many a times we will have to do some implementation on our end, and that increases the scope and the budget of this program as well.
Bill would like to
Thank you.
know how this is related with Canada, the government of Canada, and or MDOS.
Sorry, Phil, your question is you're in US. So is that a question for us? You should be able to unmute your mic, Phil.
Yeah, thank you. I was asking, how is it this, you said that you are in USA, this is a USA program, and how
No,
is
it's
it?
not. It's not. So
Ah.
CMMC is, right? CPCSC is the Canadian version of the CMMC, right?
Okay, yeah, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, like CMMC is the US program, right? CPCSC is the Canadian one. CMMC is about 18 months, maybe longer ahead of the curve, right? Like they are enforcing, requirements right now, right? CPCSC, the original timeline was fall 2025. It's December, so I don't think it's going to happen. So it's going to be for 2026. But again, like the biggest difference I mentioned is like both programs use the same controls. The difference is one of them is using Rev 2, the other one is using Rev 3, like SB 171 Rev 2 and Rev 3, and there's a big technical difference between them. As Sushant mentioned, the idea was that both programs were going to recognize each other, but with the current geopolitical situation, I don't see it happening, at least for the next 3 years. Things may change later on because, like, even if you want to do equivalency, technically you won't be able to do because your measuring stick is different, right? One of them is using Rev 2, the other one is using Rev 3. It's not going to 100% match. US is going to match, they will switch to Rev 3 in about 18 months. So once that happens, and the, new president, things may change at that point. Any other question from anyone?
Shelby?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for the presentation. One small thing that just came to my mind here. So we have a variety of subcontractors that do require access to project data. And then there are some scenarios where we would provide our company's IT equipment to certain subcontractors to use. In that case, would they then be covered under our certification because it's our IT equipment, or would they still require their own assessment?
We have to look into the details, Shelby, but based on your definition, probably they're going to be covered under yours because you're giving them IT equipment owned by your company, right?
Exactly. My train of thought is like the site where it would be accessed. Is that part of the assessment as well, or is the assessment solely conducted on the IT infrastructure and security and all that?
So some of the details are not clear. Like in CMMC program, the way they handle is you get a cage code, right, for each physical location, because like as part of the assessment, there's 21 controls that you got to be on site for the assessment, right? Those level of details is not available in the CPCSC program yet. My guess is it will probably going to be dependent, but let's say you have 10 subcontractors, they are attending from various locations. It may not be practical. It all depends on your circumstances too, right? There's a lot of unknowns with CPCSC because, as I mentioned, like we're about 18 months behind CMMC, right? Like there's no central system built yet to report. Like you're supposed to report your level 1, level 2. In the US, it's called SPURS. That equivalent system is not in place, right? In PSPC, DND landscape yet. It will get there, but we're not there yet. So there's a lot of questions unknown. So some of them are going to be judgment calls at the point, right? And then also may require a conversation with the PSPC and DND personnel to say, okay, how do we handle this thing, right? That's going to be a key discussion because this is also new for them too, right? I highly recommend that when you're at that point, initiating those discussions with the procurement officer as well as a DND rep to say, okay, here's our situation. What do we do, right? And get the guidance from them.
And
That's
just
great.
just to add to that, Shelby, I think the rule of thumb is first what the data flow might look like when you are dealing with or when you're transmitting data to subcontractors. If you are transmitting data to subcontractor is another organization who is going to process that data, their infrastructure might fall under, they might also need to comply with same level of compliance that you have. That is called as flow down requirement in CMMC. But now when it comes to CPCSC, as we are in the early phases, we are still figuring out like how the flow down requirement is going to be passed on to subcontractors.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Going once, twice. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, if there's no further questions, we'll email the presentation afterwards. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to myself, Deborah, or Sushant. Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Happy holidays. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.